So this episode is going to be quite a departure from what we normally do, because instead of all the facts, figures and charts, we're going to talk about thoughts and feelings. Ooh, I know. It's okay, you're in safe hands. I'm a trained life coach. Admittedly, that was 5 years ago and I've forgotten most of it now. But it's me. It's not going to be overly gushy. But this is a very important topic. And what spurred this is an email I've had from someone who is involved in a local council. It's not Colchester, but it is local to this area. And his email really struck a chord because it's not the first time I've had an email like this. Now, I received this email shortly after I did the video on climate change. You have hit a nerve with some councils as they are not used to being held accountable. I'm amazed how many committees have no members of public turning up. And yes, it does make a difference to how they act when the public are there and when they are not. What motivates these councils to go green? Money. It is as simple as that. All grants are directed towards it, and county councils push councils into accepting the green agenda. And then he's linked to a video with Lord Gummer. They roll out people like Lord Gummer, the same one who has got money invested in green companies, working on UK contracts, and is involved in a number of chairmanships for charities and organisations who push the green agenda. He tells them what to think, what to say, and once the video streaming has stopped, how to cash in. You only need look at his register of interest to see that, plus press reports of his investments. At the end of the day, I do think the weather is changing, but it always has. I agree with the recycling and reusing if it is done properly, but the new Essex Waste Partnership strategy still has many holes in it, for example, and they use very clever wording such as energy recovery or unallocated waste, which means incinerators. But of course they would never use such a dirty word. I know of one council who went all commercial EV vehicles and has several of which are in the back of the yard, which are either uneconomic to fix or they cannot work out what is wrong with them, so they just sit there. But they are seen to be green. I thought you might be interested. Keep up the good work. There are a few of us who do not believe this, but have to keep our heads down. So I thanked him for all his information. But then I said, I would like to challenge you a bit on your last sentence about keeping heads down. You are very probably not alone in not falling for the BS. You might be quite surprised at just how many people think as you do, but are also keeping their heads down. This is how they defeat us. Everyone thinks they can't speak out. I do appreciate how hard it is to speak up in a council culture, but there are ways to do it. Questions get people thinking. Yes, they can dismiss them, but it starts to sow seeds, and done enough, they germinate. If no one speaks up now, then when? As soon as digital IDs and fully controllable central bank digital currency are in place, which will be tied to carbon credits, it's game over. Speaking up then will be too late. Is this situation going to change for the better if we all remain silent? And judging from your comments, it's not just councillors that feel they can't speak up about this. People in their everyday lives feel they cannot speak the truth. And it's this fear that binds everybody, and it's completely understandable. So back in the day, if you were ostracised from your tribe, that's it. You'd be on your own and you'd die. So it is hardwired into us to remain part of the group, no matter how mad they might be. And people often say in the comments like, oh, I can't do what you do. Well, you don't need to do exactly what I do. Being on camera isn't everybody's cup of tea. I mean, to be honest, it's not really mine. I forced myself to do it because I needed to for work. And for those of you that don't know, I teach garden design online. And when I first switched from just being a garden designer to actually going over to teach it, I did deliberate for a good 3 weeks about whether I could get away with doing video tutorials that just filmed my hand drawing and possibly the back of my head. If you remember that American comedy Tool Time with Tim the Toolman Taylor, his next door neighbour Wilson, you never ever got to see his face. So I seriously did consider that, but I did eventually decide, oh come on, just get over yourself. So that's how I ended up doing video. And because I've got the most video experience out of anyone in our group, that's how I've ended up doing these videos. It's not comfortable doing this. I don't want to do it particularly, but when you have done the deep research and you know where all this is going, having complete strangers do hurty words at you is nothing compared to what is coming. Absolutely nothing. It's an irrelevance. And it certainly isn't comfortable doing public speaking and walking into a hostile environment that is the council, and knowing they don't want you there and they don't want to listen to a word you say. None of this is comfortable, but it is necessary. And the thing is, courage is contagious. If one person starts to speak out, other people do as well. And as I said in my reply, you can ease in slowly. You don't have to go full bore telling people they're wrong. Just asking questions is a very powerful way, because people can't help but think about something. It is much harder to dismiss a question than it is someone presenting you with facts, figures and graphs, which they will ignore anyway, because if someone has made up their mind on a subject without looking at data, graphs and charts, showing them data, graphs and charts won't persuade them otherwise. It just doesn't. You can talk to your blue in the face, they will not listen. But if you ask them to explain something to you and say, you know, this is a legitimate question from a member of the public and I feel we need to answer it. And also, we're not doing our jobs well as counsellors if we haven't considered all the available information. There is something critically important about courage, which I'm going to get into at the end, which is based on the work of Dr. David R. Hawkins. But before we get to this, let's look at just on a practical level. Now, we have quite a wide range of viewers on this channel. Some of you have done years of research and you know exactly what is going on, and none of the events that are unfolding in the world right now come as any surprise to you. And others are just beginning to think, things are really not right. Nothing makes sense. Why is the world so upside down? Well, if you're in that latter category, what you really need to do is get an understanding of where the final destination is with everything that is happening. And one of the ways that I did that was to read through official government documents from the EU, the UK government, and also the people who are steering a lot of these policies, like the UN, the World Economic Forum, all those types of organisations, because governments around the globe are all doing the same thing at the same time, and the odds of that happening are very unlikely. So this stuff is obviously coming from somewhere. So in the first lockdown, I was stuck in Spain, and they were not messing around with their lockdown. We weren't allowed out to even exercise for nearly 3 months. They had police patrols all around the beaches, the urbanisations, every 15 minutes, armed police on the streets searching your bags to make sure you were only going out for essentials. And if anybody was caught doing anything they shouldn't be doing, the fines started at €600. So that gave me rather a lot of time on my hands to research things. And most of the time I couldn't believe what I was reading, so I went directly to government sources. So if you don't know why the world is upside down, you need to find out, and you need to do it, because that is where the power is. Nothing is hidden. It's all there if you take the time to read it. So for example, people cannot believe what is being taught to young children these days regarding sexual education. Warning, sexually graphic content coming up that apparently is suitable for 3 years old and over.
This is what they're teaching kids, RSE.
Yeah. This is the
Ages 3 and up. Is that right?
Yeah.
Ages 3 and up.
This is the
Well, in 2020, I read the World Health Organization Standards for Sexual Education in Europe, which was written in 2010. And to my great horror, I came across their sexual education matrix and what they've got in store for young children. 0 to the age of 4 gets to learn about enjoyment and pleasure when touching one's own body, gain an awareness of gender identity, discovery of their own body and own genitals. Well, they probably discovered those already, but anyway, they up the ante for 4 to 6-year-olds, and they get to consolidate their gender identity. And how to use sexual language in a non-offensive way. Well, yes, that's something every 4 to 6-year-old needs to master. And so it goes on. Pregnancy, also in same-sex relationships, infertility. Now, I'm not saying all of this is bad. The consequences of pregnancy for young teenagers, very important conversation to have with 12 to 15-year-olds. There are definitely some useful things in here. So although I knew back in 2020 there was going to be a big push for the sexualisation of children, never did I imagine it would be like this, and that it would be so graphic and so much on the push to become trans. And this book graphically shows what would need to be done to male genitalia to transition. None of this stuff just pops out of the blue. It's by design. It's all been orchestrated, and I'm afraid there is far worse to come. So you really do need to find out what is coming down the pipe, so to speak. The power is in doing your own research, because you will never believe it if another person tells you. The closest I've come to doing it in a video, and it just barely touches the surface, is one on my other channel, and it's called 15-Minute City Nonsense. That gives you a tiny overview of some of it, but it doesn't go into the really dark stuff, and there is a lot of dark stuff, and it does unsettle you. But when you do delve into what they're doing with children, all of that stuff in that document makes sense. You know why they're doing it. And that is my main motivator. I can't stand by and do nothing knowing all of this. We need to protect the future generations. We must do. We cannot let this happen for the children. We just can't. When you understand the sheer scope of what is happening and the types of people that are orchestrating all of this, who, let's say, have a bit of a predilection for children, and the number of them in key positions is, well, alarming. And it is deeply disturbing. So once you know all of this stuff, our own little fears about people saying hurty words to us and being ostracised kind of puts it into perspective that that is irrelevant. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's not unpleasant. It can be. But the more you do, the more you put yourself out there, the tougher you'll get. To have someone who's coming from a place of ignorance and anger having a go at you, it just becomes a joke after a while. The more abusive the comments, the more I laugh these days. This one, for example, from someone who's completely ignorant. I mean, for goodness sake, that is not how you spell Canute. Education standards these days are just so appalling. But yes, the world is full of Canutes. There's a never-ending supply of them. But there's bigger things at play here than our egos and our feelings. And whilst there's the obvious battle of what is happening in the world, there's the unobvious one, and the one that I think is the most important to win. And that's the inner battle, what goes on in here. And I have no intellectual defence for saying this, it's just a feeling I have. That's my #1 fan there pointed out. Just because you feel something is true doesn't mean to say it is. So take this for what it's worth. I feel this is Earth School, and that we're here to evolve. But unfortunately, rather a lot of us have been having far too much fun. We haven't been paying attention in class, and the final exams are coming. We haven't done our homework, we haven't done our revision, and now we're frantically playing catch up, cramming at the last minute. No one wants to do public speaking. It isn't comfortable doing it by any stretch of the imagination. What it has taken for us all to find that courage to speak out, and the more courage you find, the more you will get. It is like a courage muscle. The more discomfort, the more the growth. And you change as a person. You start to come into alignment with who you are. You start to step into that power that we all have. And if you look at the conditioning in society, the way things are set up, the media, it's all about making you feel there's something wrong with you, that you're helpless, that you've got to rely on the government, you're not capable. What do you know? You're just a little person. When actually, I think the truth is the opposite. I think we're all very powerful. We just don't know it. No one individual can fix the problems we have today, or group. I mean, we get so many comments, people saying, oh, we're so glad you're doing this. Like, no. This is all of us. We've all got to take responsibility for where we are in the world and change it, because you can't rely on politicians or councillors or anyone else. We've all got to roll up our sleeves and muck in and sort this out. None of us get to sit this one out, unfortunately. We really all are in this one together. And I think that's a big part of this, stepping into our own power and coming together. Society is so divisive, pitting one person against another, and each and every one of us that steps into their personal power, that has a huge ripple effect to everybody else. So those of you that have come across this book, Power versus Force, will know exactly what I mean. And the concepts in this book could just revolutionise how we go about everything that we do. Now, Dr. Hawkins was very well known back in the day because of the work he did with Nobelist Linus Pauling. They wrote a book together called Orthomolecular Psychiatry, where they were the first to put the link together with mental health and the diet, what you're putting into your body. But he went on to do loads more work, and this, I think, is his most important work. Now, in this book, he lays out the calibrations of different levels of consciousness and how they affect human behaviour. Now, it's going to sound a little bit woo-woo and out there if you've not come across things like kinesiology, but actually he comes at it from a scientific basis. Now, kinesiology is muscle testing. It turns out that although the mind can lie and deceive itself, the body doesn't. So the body can always tell truth from falsehood. Now, that might sound a bit out there for many of you, but it does actually stand up to the first tenet of the scientific method, i.e. it's replicatable. So it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, if something is good, your body will test strong when you do certain muscles. Right, I'll bend my arm because you're not going to see it if I put it out straight, but normally you've got a straight arm and the kinesiologist will just use 2 fingers and they will test you to check that you have a certain level of strength. Then they'll put either a substance or get you to think of something, and then if it's positive, your arm will stay strong, and if it's negative, it will just drop, it will go weak. Now, this is often used for things like food allergies and medications to see if something's going to be good for you, but it has a whole host of other uses. Now, I'm not going to go into the science of it because we'll be here all day, but in this book he talks about advanced theoretical physics, through associated mathematics, nonlinear dynamics. He does go into the science a little bit, although he tries to keep it basic as well. When he was working with Linus Pauling, they conducted testings with audiences all over, and they found that if they put an artificial sweetener in an envelope so people couldn't see what it was and tested it, their arms would go weak every time. And something like a natural vitamin C, their arms would stay strong every time. So Dr. Hawkins was inspired to take this further because as a psychiatrist he was always very interested in human behaviour. So that he could measure and calibrate consciousness of people, he created his own scale, and the numbers he used were from 1 to 1,000. And then using kinesiology, he tested various emotions to put them on that scale. Then once he'd created this scale, he got people all over the world to test it to make sure that the results were replicatable, and they were. Below the level of 200, everybody tests weak, and 200 and above, everybody's arms went strong. So this is the scale, and what's at 200? Courage. So let me read you what it says about courage. At the 200 level, power first appears. When we test subjects at all energy levels below 200, we find, as can be readily verified, that all go weak. Everyone goes strong in the response to the life-supportive fields above 200. This is the critical line that distinguishes the positive and negative influences of life. At the level of courage, an attainment of true power occurs. Therefore, it is also the level of empowerment. People at this level put back into the world as much energy as they take. At lower levels, populations as well as individuals drain energy from society without reciprocating. The collective level of consciousness of mankind remained at 190 for many centuries, and curiously only jumped to its current level of 204 within the last decade. Now, this book was written 30 years ago, so if there's any kinesiologists out there, it would be fascinating for you to test what level we're at now. And also, obviously, test that what's written in this book is accurate. So that's someone operating on a consciousness level of 200 or above. But let's look at pride, which has an energy level of 175. Now, this is logarithmic, so it's a massive difference between someone operating at the level of pride and someone operating at the level of courage. The problem, as we all know, is that pride goeth before a fall. Pride is defensive and vulnerable because it is dependent upon external conditions, without which it can suddenly revert to a lower level. The inflated ego is vulnerable to attack. Pride remains weak because it can be knocked off its pedestal into shame, which is the threat that fires the fear of loss of pride. The downside of pride is arrogance and denial. These characteristics block growth. The whole problem of denial is one of pride. Thus, pride is a very sizable block to the acquisition of real power. Now, in the book, he goes on to discuss how you could use things like kinesiology in government, in the judicial system, Can you imagine how quick trials would be? Is this person guilty as charged? Yes or no? You'd obviously need a very good kinesiologist, of course. So just imagine if nobody below a consciousness level of 200 was allowed into politics. Okay, Westminster would be completely deserted. But that aside, imagine if we chose our councillors and our MPs based on their consciousness level. That would change things quite dramatically, wouldn't it? No more trying to decide who to vote for, you just pick the one with the highest level of consciousness. Imagine if society decided that everything that comes into contact with children under the age of 16 has to be calibrated at a level of 200 or more. So every book, every children's TV programme, everything they learn at school being calibrated at 200 or above. Just imagine the difference that would make to our children. You would completely transform the world in a single generation. And then once those children have left school, they're more likely to want to create music, films, books that are also of a similar calibration. They're not going to want to be drawn into the lower levels. So instead of the thought police, what we really need are the consciousness cops. So that knock at the door. Excuse me, sir. It's been reported that your consciousness calibrates over 200. We'd like you to come with us, please. Your country needs you. You've got the choice of either working in the school system or at the council. Entirely up to you, sir, but step this way. Now, who knows if we've got enough people calibrating at 200 or above to fill the positions needed. But that's why if we started with the children and made sure that as many teachers as possible, and certainly everything that they are coming in contact with, had that right calibration, then the world would transform in a single generation. That's how powerful this could be. So this whole thing about courage is just so multifaceted. It works on every level. Every time someone comes from a place of courage, that will affect everybody. Now, it's not written in here, but in the audiobook version, he does say that the person doing the testing, it helps if their consciousness is 200 above. And I would think most people that are drawn to kinesiology probably are at least at that level. So if there's any skilled kinesiologists out there, and if you're willing, it would be fascinating to see if we've got any councillors in Colchester Council that have a consciousness calibration of 200 or more. But obviously the first thing you need to check is whether this book is accurate. But even if it's not possible to calibrate consciousness, you could still use kinesiology on everyday decision making. Like, is this going to solve the financial difficulties this council has? Yes or no? Is this going to be good for our constituents? Yes or no? You could still use kinesiology. Just imagine how fabulous it would be never to have to debate things anymore. You could just do a simple test. Is there a man-made climate emergency? Yes or no? Will the net zero initiatives make any difference to global temperatures? Yes or no? Is that wind farm going to produce the amount of electricity they say it is in the brochure? Yes or no? Now, for the really contentious subjects like this, it is better to write the statements down on a piece of paper and pop them in an envelope, so neither the person doing the testing or the person being tested knows what's in the envelope, and then you're a lot less likely to get any false positives. But a good trained kinesiologist makes sure that the person doesn't switch when they do the testing. So if there are any kinesiologists willing to do this, you do need to calibrate to the scale that's in the book. So there's a setup statement here on a scale of 1 to 600, where 600 represents enlightenment, and then you could say, do any of the councillors at Colchester Council calibrate at 200 or above? And if there's anything else you'd like to calibrate, you could do this channel or our current government, whatever you fancy testing. So courage is such a critical thing on so many levels. And the more each and every one of us steps into our own power, the more we raise up everybody around us. And that, I think, is the key to all of this. It's not the outer battles that we might be having with the council or with whoever. It's those inner ones. They're the ones that are truly important. So do that makes you uncomfortable. And just do little bits of courage each day. And it makes a difference. You build up. And you will have days where you wobble and you just can't do it. The more you do it, the less of those days you will have, until you'll feel the wobble, but you'll do it anyway. Just imagine a world where everybody works on themselves. Every time someone is triggered, they sort it out internally rather than externally and getting into a fight on social media. just imagine the world we would create. You know, my journey with this, I've never been someone that's spoken out about anything in my life before. I actually don't like making a fuss or making a nuisance of myself. Believe it or not. I know that's hard to believe. And yes, you may well get some hate back. It's not easy and it's not comfortable. It really isn't. But it's necessary. And no, the hate isn't mutual. I don't have hate in me. No room, too full of sarcasm. So I'm going to play out with me reading just a few bits from this book that you might find interesting. So he talks about some of the things that this could be used for. On a more mundane level, the same technique can determine whether an investment is an honest one or not, or whether an institution can be trusted. We can ascertain who is fit to govern. In the case of media event, we can instantly tell whether the interviewer or interviewee is telling the truth, and, if he is, what level of truth is being expressed. If you try this during Network News Hour, you may have a shocking revelation. On many occasions, all the public figures are lying. I'm not surprised, do you? Health research. False answers often preclude searching for true causes. For instance, it is currently dogma that tobacco causes cancer. Our research, however, revealed that organically grown tobacco tests kinesiologically strong, whereas commercial tobacco tests weak. Tobacco was not noted as a carcinogen before 1957, and it does so now as a result of the chemicals introduced into its manufacture at the time. For our purposes, it is really only necessary to recognise that power is that which makes you go strong. Force makes you go weak. Love, compassion and forgiveness, which may by some be mistakenly thought of as submissive, are, in fact, profoundly empowering. Revenge, judgmentalism and condemnation, on the other hand, inevitably make you go weak. Therefore, regardless of moral righteousness, it is a simple clinical fact that in the long run, the weak cannot prevail against the strong. That which is weak falls of its own accord. Individuals of great power throughout human history have been those who have totally aligned themselves with powerful attractors. Again and again they have stated that the power they manifested was not of themselves. Each attributed the source of the power to something greater than himself. The Constitution of the United States can provide a rewarding study. This document calibrates at about 700. If one goes through it, sentence by sentence, the source of its power appears. It is the concept that all men are equal by virtue of the divinity of their creation, and human rights are intrinsic to human creation and therefore inalienable. Interestingly enough, this is the very concept that was the source of Mahatma Gandhi's power. Violence is force. Because Gandhi was aligned with power rather than force, he forbade all use of violence in his cause, and because he expressed universal principles which calibrate at 700, he was able to unite the will of the people. When the will of the people is so united by and aligned with universal principle, it is virtually unconquerable. Colonialism, calibrated at 175, is founded in self-interest of the ruling country. Gandhi demonstrated for the world to witness the power of selflessness versus the force of self-interest. Force often relies upon rhetoric, propaganda and spurious argument to garner support and disguise underlying motivations. One characteristic of truth, though, is that it needs no defence. It is self-evident. That all men are created equal requires no justification or rhetorical persuasion. The principles upon which true power is based never require vindication, as force inevitably does. There are always endless arguments about whether force is justified or not. The true statesman serves the people. The politician exploits people to serve his own ambitions. The statesman sacrifices himself to serve others. The politician sacrifices others to serve himself. A familiar law of the observable universe is that force results in equal and opposite counterforce. All attacks, therefore, whether mental or physical, result in counterattack. Malice literally makes us sick. We are always the victims of our own spite. Even secret hostile thoughts result in physiological attack on one's own body. On the other hand, like love, laughter heals. Every joke reminds us that our reality is transcendent, beyond the specifics of event. Totalitarian systems are notably devoid of humour at any level. Laughter, which brings acceptance and freedom, is a threat to their rule through force and intimidation. It is hard to oppress people who have a good sense of humour. Beware the humourless, whether in a person, institution or belief system. It is always accompanied by an impulse to control and dominate, even if its proclaimed objective is to create prosperity or peace. Although only 15% of the world's population is above the critical consciousness level of 200, the collective power of that 15% has the weight to counterbalance the negativity of the remaining 85% of the world's population. Because the scale of power advances logarithmically, a single avatar at a consciousness level of 1,000 can in fact totally counterbalance the collective negativity of all of mankind. Kinesiological testing has shown that one individual at the 700 counterbalances 70 million individuals below the level of 200. One individual at level 600 counterbalances 10 million individuals below level 200. An individual at 500 counterbalances 750,000 individuals. At level 400, they counterbalance 400,000 individuals, 300 counterbalances 90,000, and 12 individuals at 700 equal one avatar at 1,000. There are currently 12 persons on the planet who calibrate at 700. Well, this book was written 30 years ago, so let's hope we have a few more. Were it not for the counterbalances, mankind would self-destruct out of sheer mass of its unopposed negativity. The difference in power between a loving thought is 10 to the 35 million microwatts, and a fearful thought 10 to 750 million microwatts. It's so enormous it is beyond the capacity of human imagination to easily comprehend. We can see from the analysis above, however, that even a few loving thoughts during the course of a day more than counterbalance all of our negative thoughts. The initial effect of taking responsibility for the truth of one's life is to raise lower energy levels to 200. The critical level at which power first appears, and the stepping stone to all the higher levels. The courage to face truth leads eventually to acceptance, where greater power arises at the level of 350. Here there is sufficient energy to solve the majority of man's social problems. This in turn leads to yet greater power available at 500, the level of love. Knowing our own and everyone else's human foibles gives rise to forgiveness, and thence to compassion. Compassion is the doorway to grace and to the final realization of who we are and why we are here, and the ultimate source of all existence. A thorough absorption of the materials presented herein has been shown to be able to raise one's level of consciousness by an average of 35 points. Inasmuch as the progression of consciousness during the average human lifetime lived on this globe has only been 5 points, such an increase in individual awareness is an enormous benefit in of itself. And in advanced theoretical physics and nonlinear dynamics have shown, any individual increase also raises to some degree the consciousness of everyone on the planet. He also does a calibration for all the different religions and where they started out at and where they are now, and also various different Bible versions, and it's quite interesting, that section. So, plenty of food for thought. So a little bit of courage can go a long way. So until next time, may the power be with you.